They say a house is just wood and nails, but to me, this one breathed something more. It had a heartbeat. The old Victorian stood hunched over like an old woman, her bones creaking, her paint chipped and flaking like tired skin. Vines clawed up the porch railings, and weeds claimed the yard like it was theirs now. But it was mine, left to me by Aunt Sylvia. I hadn't been back since the funeral. After I lost my job, it made sense to come here. Just for a while, I told myself. Just until I figured things out. I didn't tell Landon I needed space, because I didn't. What I needed was to breathe without someone finishing my sentence or rolling their eyes halfway through it. He never liked this house. Said it smelled like old ghosts and missed opportunities. That was before he turned it into a joke. Landon always knew how to make a room bend toward him. Charisma, they called it. What I saw was control, dressed in charm. In conversations, my words barely made it to the table before they were buried under louder ones. Usually his. I used to think marriage was compromise. But somehow, I always ended up the one compromising. New jobs, new cities, his promotions, his timing. And when I finally got something of my own, it became his latest punchline. At dinner last Thursday, we had friends over, people from his work mostly. I made pot roast, set the table with candles, even used the good plates. Halfway through the meal, someone asked about the inheritance. She got a haunted shack, Landon chuckled, not a home. The Addams family would feel right at home there. The room laughed. Forks clinked against plates. I laughed too, or something like it. I reached for my wine glass, hoping the moment would pass. But he kept going. You should see the place. You ever watch those true crime shows where someone's always buried in the basement? Yeah, like that. Someone snorted. Yikes, Madeline. You keeping secrets out there? I smiled again. Polite. Small. And I didn't say a word. It wasn't the laughter that stung. It was how proud he looked, like reducing me made him taller. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of our bed, watching him breathe, peaceful like he hadn't just gutted me in front of everyone. My mind drifted to the day Aunt Sylvia's lawyer handed me the keys. She'd raised me when my own parents gave up. Just for 3 years, but they were the years that saved me. It's yours now, he'd said. She insisted. Aunt Sylvia used to say, sometimes what's hidden under dust is worth more than gold. I didn't understand it back then. But that night, I wanted to. I needed to. So, I packed a small bag before sunrise. Didn't say much. Just told Landon I needed to check on the place, maybe clean up a bit. He barely looked up from his phone. The drive felt longer than it was. Pennsylvania roads in early fall have this way of wrapping around you, like they know you're running from something and won't tell. I pulled into the gas station on the edge of town. The clerk behind the counter was maybe in his 20s, bored and scrolling his phone. He glanced up once. You here for the Sylvia place? He asked. I nodded. He didn't say anything else. Just nodded back. The porch groaned under my weight. Dust spiraled through the air as I pushed open the door. It was like time had frozen in there, books still on the shelf, a sweater draped over a chair. The air was stale, but familiar. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, letting the silence wrap around me. In the study, light filtered through cracked shutters. I pulled off the covers from furniture, one by one, until the room started to look like itself again. On the far end was her old desk, solid oak, carved edges, always locked. I ran my fingers along the top, then tugged at the drawers. All opened except one. The bottom right. It was locked, but the wood around it looked scraped, like someone had forced it before. I knelt, inspecting the side, and something shifted. A small envelope slipped out from beneath the desk. My name on it, just M. Inside, one sentence on yellowed paper, written in her familiar scrawl. Don't let them laugh, you'll find the truth below. I stared at it for a long while. The air felt heavier, the silence no longer comforting. And I realized this house was about to whisper back all the truths they laughed at. I sat at the kitchen table in the old Victorian house, its windows half-shuttered, the morning light faint, and I unfolded the yellowed envelope I'd found the night before. My fingers trembled, not because I was afraid, but because I knew I was finally looking at something real. Aunt Sylvia's handwriting scanned across the page. Don't trust them. They know what's under the floorboards. He always wanted this house. He knew what was in it. Be careful. The paper crinkled as I pressed it flat, and I heard the echo of words I'd ignored for years. His interest in that property, his slick grin when I brought up refurbishing it, his laugh after we sold the idea to his board of friends. I tucked the letter into an old copy of Little Women, one I had kept since I was a teenager. The edges were frayed, the pages yellowed. I slid it in deep under the cover, hoping no one else would find it before I did. In that moment, I realized disbelief had become my default. I'd spent years believing I was imagining things. The way Landon glanced at the yard with disdain, how he changed the subject every time I mentioned the house's history. Now I knew, I wasn't wrong. By noon I moved into the study with the dusty journal I found, the envelopes, and the blueprint rolls. The attic board above had a dull knock when I stepped in, probably loose boards, but it felt like an invitation. I found a bricked-up door in the basement, glaring back at me in the journal's map sketch. Torn pages, scribbles in Aunt Sylvia's hand. Expected visitors, do not schedule harvest, trust the map. A second envelope taped beneath the drawer, unsigned amendment naming me sole heir but bearing a blank where a lawyer should have signed. No date, just the signature line crossed out. It hit me then, all the times I thought I'd been paranoid were real. Someone intervened. Flashbacks fell on me like rain. A year ago, Landon tossed an urgent letter from Aunt Sylvia into the trash can, apologized with a sigh, "Sorry honey, old mail." I shrugged it off then, comfortable being the trusting wife, but now I replayed the moment in screeching high definition. I recalled his voice, "You're overthinking it. That's just old people being dramatic." The phrase lodged in my memory. How many times had I brushed aside my instinct to keep the peace? I realized I'd been silent so others could feel comfortable. Late afternoon I called Erin, my cousin, who lived across state lines. Her voice cracked when she said Aunt Sylvia had spoken to her about updating the will. Erin said, "Landon came by that afternoon. Sylvia wasn't herself afterward." The words slid like ice across my spine. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Thank you, Erin. You just helped me begin something." I hung up and stared at the cracked mirror in the hall. My reflection looked tired but not broken. I said to myself, "You were never crazy. You just believed the wrong people." I pulled a notebook from the shelf and made a list. Scan the documents, check the county archives, find the original will. The resolve settled around me like the dust I was cleaning. That evening, I dropped to my knees behind the closet in the hallway and lifted a floorboard, guided by the blueprint's marking. Cold wood under my fingertips, a sealed metal box beneath. My phone buzzed. Text from Landon. "Why are you digging into the past?" I closed the floorboard slowly, the box tucked under my arm, the glow of my phone lighting the dusty floor. A new thought slammed. I might not have hours, maybe minutes, before the truth moved faster than I could. Rain tapped the windows as I settled into the attic, the air heavy with years of dust and memory. I carried that sealed metal box like a weight in my arms, reluctant to open it yet unable to wait. When I finally lifted the lid, inside lay faded photographs of Aunt Sylvia with two men I didn't know, one smiling, the other stern. Underneath, a stack of legal courier receipts, yellowed at the edges, and an envelope stamped, "Unfiled copy, do not discard." A small key dangled by a tag labeled, "Library Hearth." My breath caught. The letter inside was signed by Sylvia, naming me as the sole heir. Someone else had changed it. Someone I trusted. My fingers trembled as I took in the betrayal. I stood there, silent, letting the realization wash over me. Landon, or someone close to him, might have swapped the original will. I remembered how often I brushed off his comments, his casual jabs about my family's house. He accidentally redirected mail. He forgot to mention meetings. I thought I was being paranoid. Then I found the evidence. Using the key, I followed the blueprint I had found earlier and pried open a loose brick in the fireplace in the study. Behind it, a hidden wall safe. Inside were the original deed to the house and surrounding land, Aunt Sylvia's personal journals detailing her fear of being manipulated, and a camcorder with labeled tapes. One entry read, "If she ever doubts her worth, let these words remind her, she was always meant for more." I stood in the dim light, reverent, and wondered how long I'd been standing in the shadows. I carried the camcorder to the attic, inserted the tape into the player, and watched. Sylvia's voice trembled as she spoke directly to whoever was watching. "He's seducing my nurse to gain access to my estate. I'm not senile, just ignored." She named Titus Kensington as the lawyer who never returned my calls after Landon visited him. The tape ended abruptly as thunder rolled outside, the attic lights flickering in sync. Anger roared in me, not loud, but burning steady. I realized this wasn't just about a house. It was about truth. Silence settled around me after the tape ended. My mind replayed the years I let Landon decide things for our family. The countless times I deferred so he wouldn't feel threatened. I remembered him saying to someone, "She's too soft to fight this. Always has been." And for a moment, I hated that I once believed him. The saddest part wasn't that he said it, it was that I listened. I closed my eyes and counted the seconds of quiet. Then I whispered, "Maybe I was never weak. Just quiet." But silence isn't weakness. I copied photos and receipts, secured the camcorder and journals in a locked suitcase, packed it quickly. I called a friend in town who introduced me to a lawyer I trusted, and then contacted a notary. I told myself I was entering strategy mode. The house around me groaned with its own weight, as if it knew I had finally awakened. Just as I switched off the attic light and was about to leave, I heard a knock downstairs. My phone buzzed with a voicemail. "I know what you found." I froze. The voice was familiar, but the message wasn't. I held the phone against my heart, surrounded by rain and shadow and unfinished business. I stood in front of the law office, watching my reflection warp in the glass door. My hands wouldn't stay still. The brass handle was cold, too smooth, too formal, just like everything inside. I pushed through the door and stepped onto thick carpet that muffled my nerves. Titus Kensington sat behind his desk like a statue carved from old gilt. He nodded once, tight and distant, then reached into a drawer and slid an envelope toward me. Manila, thick, sealed with red tape and a brass clasp. "Open it here," he said. "It's addressed to you and only you. As per the will." The label was handwritten in my father's precise block print. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I broke the seal and unfolded the pages inside. The words were dry, formal, but unmistakable. The mineral rights under the estate were untouched. Still in my name. Still mine. Landon's voice rang in my head, mocking, "You got a haunted house, not a legacy." I smiled, small, bitter. Well, turns out I got both. And one of them was worth more than he ever guessed. The sky had darkened while I was inside. Rain came in slow streaks at first, smearing the windshield as I sat in my car. I hadn't even started the engine when my phone lit up. Landon. I stared at his name for a moment, then hit accept. "Serena," he started, with that same calm he wore when he lied. "Let's be smart about this." I said nothing. "We both know there's no need for lawyers and courts. The house is yours. That's fine. Keep it. But let's work something out on the land, the contracts, No, I said. One word. Solid. Heavy. He took a long pause. "You're risking everything for a relic." And there it was. The edge in his voice. The fear. "No," I repeated. "You're risking losing control." His voice dropped to a threat dressed up as logic. "Don't be foolish. This isn't about pride. You don't even know what you're walking into." I ended the call. He didn't call back. I sat there listening to the rain, then whispered to the silence, "Neither do you." A few hours later, I walked into Cassian Vale Jr.'s office downtown. The place looked like it had been scrubbed of dust, of memory, of anything human. Clean glass walls. Empty smiles. He shook my hand like he didn't mean it. "Serena," he said, "you've certainly stirred the pot." He offered me coffee I didn't take, and slid a folder across the table. "Let's end this well," he said. "You walk, you get paid, and you avoid making enemies out of friends." I opened the folder, eyes scanning down numbers that looked generous. Too generous. And then, there it was. Buried in small type, Felix Mansfield, primary heir, upon transition of ownership. I looked up. "This isn't just about buying me out." His grin didn't even twitch. "Sometimes people forget to proofread. And sometimes people forget who they're dealing with." His chair creaked as he leaned forward. "You'll thank us when the dust settles." I pushed the contract back to him. "The dust is what I'm here to clean." Before I walked out, I slipped the folder open again and snapped pictures of every page. I made sure he saw me do it. I wanted him to know I wasn't afraid of whatever storm they thought they were building. By the time I returned to the mansion, the rain had softened, but the chill hadn't. I took off my shoes at the door and walked barefoot into the study. The fire in the hearth had turned to ash, but I lit it again, slow and steady. I sat at the desk, the only light coming from the flames and a lamp with a shade yellowed by time. I took out both documents, the letter from Titus and the photos of Cassian's contract, and laid them out. Truth beside lies, history beside manipulation. For a long moment, I just stared at them. Then I whispered, "You were always meant for more." Whether I was talking to the house, my family's name, or myself, I wasn't sure. Maybe all three. I tucked the papers back into the drawer, locked it, and slipped the key into my pocket. I didn't feel afraid anymore. I felt awake. I was about to head upstairs when my phone lit up again. A message from a number I hadn't seen since the day they lowered Sylvia into the ground. "We need to talk. Meet us tonight, Felix." I stood there, holding the phone like it might catch fire. I didn't move, didn't blink. I knew his voice, his rhythms, the way he smiled when he lied. I pressed accept without typing anything. Outside, the wind rose again. The windows trembled. I walked to the hall mirror, checked my reflection, straightened my collar. And I told myself one thing before I stepped away: you're not walking into this to be heard, you're walking in to be seen. The night before had ended in silence, but the air this morning wasn't quiet, it was loaded. I'd slept maybe 2 hours, if you could call lying still with my eyes open, sleep. The will sat beside me on the kitchen table, worn at the folds now. I read it again, then again. The video stills I'd printed lay scattered, the ink slightly smudged from where my fingers had lingered. I added a final note to my list, then tucked the entire set into 2 envelopes. One stayed with me, the other I locked away at the bank downtown, just in case this all blew up in my face. Not that I planned on losing. I texted the 3 of them, short, blunt, noon. Aunt Sylvia's, no lawyers, just us. Then I lit the burner and made tea. Real tea. Loose leaves, lemon peel, steeped like Sylvia used to make it when things were tense but had to be talked out. I even pulled out her old china cups, setting them around the coffee table like she would have. Her framed photo sat on the mantel now. She always said truth belonged in the light. So I opened every curtain in that room and let the sun pour in, no matter how cold it felt inside. Landon pulled up first, stepping out like a politician, sunglasses, perfect jacket, a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "This feels serious," he said, walking in without being asked. "You finally writing that novel of yours?" I didn't bother responding. Felix was next, always 5 minutes late and always scowling like the world owed him something. He didn't shake my hand. Didn't sit. Just stood near the wall with his arms crossed, already ready to argue. Erin arrived last, alone, no makeup, clutching her purse like it might shield her. She stepped in slow, eyes scanning everything, the photo, the table, me. "You okay?" she asked softly. "I'm steady," I said. I gestured to the table. 3 folders waited, clearly marked, carefully stacked. Landon laughed as he sat. "What's this, a murder mystery party? Should I bring snacks?" His grin faded when no one else smiled. The tension wasn't loud, but it was thick, like smoke you couldn't see but knew was there. I leaned forward and opened the first folder. "This," I said, "is the amended will Sylvia signed last year. Along with the mineral rights transfer, and the footage showing you, Landon, removing files from her office without her consent." His jaw tensed, but he stayed seated. "You think a grainy photo and some paper gives you the upper hand?" "It gives me leverage," I said. "And enough for 2 lawyers to agree this needs to be reviewed." Felix stepped closer to the table, his eyes narrowing. "This is a setup." "No," I replied. "This is a mirror. Look in it." Landon snapped, "You've always thought you were better than the rest of us. But you've never earned a thing. And you think stealing makes you entitled?" I shot back. "I didn't steal," he barked. "I protected what was rightfully ours. Sylvia didn't leave it to you." I pointed at the signature page. "She changed her mind. And you buried it." Erin's voice broke the argument. "I saw it," she said quietly. The document. You told me it was outdated. You told me not to say anything. She turned to Landon. You lied. He didn't deny it, just stared at her like she was a traitor. Then came the shift. Landon leaned back, voice low, too even. You really think people will believe you? A bitter woman with no kids, no husband, no name in this town beyond hers? That hit hard. I felt the sting, but I didn't flinch. Maybe I don't have roots, I said, because I've spent too long pulling out the poison ones. He smirked, but it was all teeth now. We've already contacted legal. This, whatever this is, could be considered harassment. Defamation. We're not the ones who'll walk out of this stained. I pulled the final envelope from my coat. 2 law firms already have notarized copies. If anything happens to me or to these documents, they go public. Fast. He took it, more careful than I expected, and set it beside him without looking. You really think this is over? No, I said. I think it's finally begun. Felix shoved the chair with a grunt and stormed out without a word. The front door slammed hard enough to make the walls shake. Erin sat frozen, her eyes wide with unshed tears, until finally they fell. This was supposed to be about family, she said. We could have fixed this. We could have, I agreed. If we'd all been honest. Landon stood slowly. His face had changed, less smug, more calculating. You think you've won something here? I shook my head. Not yet. But the game's changed. And you don't get to set the rules anymore. He hovered at the threshold, then paused. You'll regret this. I met his eyes. Next time you come here, bring a warrant. The door clicked shut behind them. I locked it. Then I leaned against it, exhaling like I'd been holding my breath for months. I walked back to the parlor and sat in Sylvia's old rocker. The cushion creaked under me, familiar and worn. The light outside had softened, but the tension in my chest hadn't. My phone buzzed against the table. Unknown number. Voicemail. I hit play. You made your move. Now it's our turn. It wasn't Landon. I knew his voice. This one was different. Lower. Steadier. Someone else was watching. Someone else had plans. The manila envelope lay on the oak desk like a live wire. I didn't touch it right away. Something about the weight of it thick, like the words inside, would sting more than shock. When I finally peeled it open, the words were exactly what I expected, and worse. Landon had filed a formal claim, half of the mineral rights, half of the inheritance Sylvia had fought to keep private. His note was brief. We're married. That money's half mine. No greeting, no emotion. Just possession. I held the paper, my fingers stiff, numb. Years of sacrifice pressed in all at once. Every job I passed on, every family gathering I hosted alone while he was networking. Every corner of my identity I shelved to keep his name shining. The light above me flickered twice before humming steady again. Sylvia's voice came back to me, words from her last winter alive. They never see the cornerstones because you laid them quiet. She meant it as love. I swallowed once, folded the document carefully, and slid it into the fireproof folder. Then I printed 2 copies, marked, timestamped, sealed. Not out of panic, out of pattern. I'd learned that quiet women build louder than anyone hears. By the time I got to the car, the rain had picked up. I didn't start the engine right away. Just stared at the old wedding photo still clipped to the dash. Landon in his navy suit, me in that pale cream dress Sylvia had altered by hand. I remembered the toast he gave that night, glass in hand, eyes glossy. You're my light. But looking at it now, I felt the truth bloom like rot. Light blinds, too. And he never once said I was his partner. Not even once. I reached into the side compartment and pulled out the legal file from last year's property transfer. Page 7. Clause 14. Spousal waiver of mineral rights, valid only if executed within 1 calendar year of property sale. His attorney filed it. My initials were there. Clean. Crisp. Dated 5 weeks after Sylvia's stroke. I shut the folder slowly and whispered to the windshield, you sold the story. I just forgot to read the fine print. The words floated in the fog of the car. Then I pressed the call button. Titus, I said when he answered. I'm ready. The library was nearly empty. Just a few overhead lights still humming and dust floating in the beams. Titus sat at the corner table already, 2 cups of coffee between us, his glasses tucked into the collar of his sweater. I hadn't seen him in years. Not since he left the firm and started his own. Still had that quiet, weighty presence, like an avalanche waiting for the right slope. He didn't waste time. He filed the clause 6 months ago, he said, flipping the pages toward me. Buried it in the LLC transfer when you bought Ashvale back from the holding trust. I stared at the signature. My own. He'd timed it perfectly. So I walked right into it, I muttered. He knew I wouldn't look too close while planning a funeral. Titus didn't nod, didn't soften it. Just waited. What's next? I asked. You start documenting, he said. Let them write their fiction. We build the facts. I lifted the coffee cup, hand steady. Not the victim, I said, mostly to myself. Not anymore. Back at home, the house was dark, save for the light under Sylvia's portrait. That one always stayed on. Her face soft in the frame, like she'd seen this coming. I placed the fireproof folders on the counter and opened the emergency case. 2 copies of every critical doc, property titles, mineral deeds, medical records, even the old letters from Sylvia warning me about Landon's hunger for status. Everything labeled and cross-referenced. I took a breath, typed the message with no salutation. Consider this your first warning. Walk away now. I hit send. I didn't expect a reply. And I didn't need one. I wasn't trying to scare him. I was drawing a line. I stepped into the hallway and paused near Sylvia's old chair. Her journal still sat in the drawer. The page I always returned to had a crease now, worn from rereading. You'll know your path when fear starts speaking in your stead. Tonight, the fear wasn't loud, it was gone. What was left was quieter, but sharper. I had just zipped the emergency case shut when the phone vibrated. I turned it over. A message from Felix. Dad has something to show you. Be at the house at midnight. I read it twice. The rain had stopped, but now snow had started. Small flurries at first. Unseasonably early. I stood at the window watching it gather at the corners of the porch. Sylvia's study lamp had flickered the first night I found the sealed envelope hidden behind her books. Now it flickered again, just once. Like punctuation. I slipped on my coat, tucked the case under my arm, and stepped into the cold. The tires cracked through the slush as I pulled onto the road. The sky hung heavy. I didn't know what waited at that house. Truth, maybe. Or war. Late in the night, I heard the soft knock on the study door, just 2 gentle raps. I opened it to see Elysia Blackwell, Landon's daughter, standing in the hall. She held a small USB drive in her hand, her eyes uncertain. Dad didn't know you had this, either, she said quietly. I took the drive, surprised, and for a moment the weight of that simple gesture settled over me. Someone I least expected had stepped into this with me. She twisted the cap off the drive and showed me the label, 2019 office tape _ Landon. My heart lurched. Inside the flickering light of Sylvia's old lamp, I watched her hand shake just a little. I recorded that 2 years ago, Elysia said. He made fun of the house. Called you, that daughter nobody cares about. I stared at the drive in my hand, then glanced at Sylvia's framed photograph above the mantel. Relief and validation washed over me. I wasn't alone. I didn't know when it started, Elysia said, but I'll help you now. I nodded. A quiet resolve formed inside me. One unexpected ally meant the landscape had shifted. The next morning I arrived at the Ashvale Community Center for the meeting, one of those heritage discussions Felix arranged to show how Landon was saving the town. Folding chairs lined up in rows, the windows letting in soft daylight, and at the front of the room Felix stood behind a podium, greeting old neighbors and smiling. I sat in the back, coat over my arm, the USB hidden under the lapel. I could feel the breeze of nervous anticipation in my chest. I remembered the quote by Maya Angelou, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." Felix introduced Landon for a round of applause. Then he motioned to me, saying I'd speak last. I nodded, careful not to let my hands shake. When my turn came, I stepped up and plugged the drive into the projector. The screen lit up with Landon's voice, laughing, mocking the Victorian house, saying bold words about my irrelevance. The room shifted. Eyes widened. A few people gasped. The man at the front froze mid-smile. I watched as the audience changed from polite to unsettled. My voice sounded firm when I began. You heard the words. You saw the face. I felt vindicated. I saw sympathy. I saw the community waking up. That moment marked a turn. I stood there, not begging, not pleading, just clear. I had the proof. Later, in the hallway outside the meeting room, my mother, Marisol Brampton, found me. Tears in her eyes, voice small. I knew about the amendment. I stayed silent because I was afraid you'd lose me. My chest tightened. I asked softly, "Why didn't you tell me when I asked?" She took a breath. "I was still your mother. I wasn't ready to lose you too." I thought of all the years her distance felt like rejection, now it felt like fear. I reached out and held her hand, feeling her tremble. "It wasn't love to silence me, it was survival," I said. She nodded, grief in her eyes. I pulled her close. Then I said, "You will be a witness. Not because I need you. Because I choose you." The betrayal hurt, but the understanding was more powerful. I had a hidden truth, and now I had family stepping into it. Back home that evening I paced past the fireplace where I'd found hidden documents, stopped at Sylvia's portrait, and looked directly at it. The fight had grown larger than Landon and Felix. It included Cassian's mining scheme, the web of deals nobody wanted exposed. I gathered the drive, the amended will, the contracts, and arranged safe backups at Titus Kensington's office. I sent Elysia a message, "Let's get ready." Then I recorded a short audio statement, "You laughed at my house, yet it held our future." I listened to my own voice and felt calm. This time, I wouldn't hide. I would step into the light on my terms. I closed the door, feeling the key turn firmly. Then the phone rang. I froze for a moment, the sound loud in the quiet house. The caller ID said, Cassian Vale Jr. He said, "I'm surprised you're still standing." I sipped my tea, stayed seated in the chair Sylvia once used. I looked at the mantel, the old house key hanging there caught the lamp's glow. I replied quietly, "I'm just getting started." Outside, thunder rolled over Ashvale. The day had closed, but the night's game had opened. The rain started just as I turned into the courthouse lot, tapping in a steady rhythm against the windshield. Ashvale's sky had a way of making the air feel heavier when something big was coming. I sat for a second, staring through the blur of water, clutching the folder on the passenger seat. It held the notarized letter from my father and the sealed documentation Titus had helped compile. I took one breath, then another, stepped into the storm, and walked through the stone archway toward the marble halls. The sound of my heels echoed against the cold floor, each step louder than the last. I passed portraits of judges and donors, the kind of men who never saw women like me as more than distractions or liabilities. My pulse thudded with each distant crack of a gavel. Landon and Felix were already inside, seated together at the respondent table, wearing expressions that told nothing. I found my seat in the gallery. Sylvia's words came back to me, clear as church bells. Courage isn't loud. It's the voice you hear when all else goes quiet. I gripped the folder tighter. No more quiet. The judge entered, and the room rose. After opening remarks, names were called. I stood, sworn in with a palm to the Bible that had once sat in my grandmother's kitchen. Then I took my place at the front and unfolded the letter. My father's handwriting looked shaky but clear. To my daughter, it began, the only one who saw the land as more than dirt. I read every word aloud, his disapproval of how his wishes had been ignored, his validation of my claim as the sole heir to Ashvale's mineral rights. The courtroom held its breath. I didn't flinch. I looked right at Landon. His jaw clenched. Felix blinked, looked down at his shoes. When I finished, I paused, then spoke again. "When someone shows you who they are," I said, "believe them the first time." That quote had carried me through nights when I wanted to believe the best in them. Now, I saw what the truth looked like in public. Gasps echoed. A few heads nodded. The silence afterward felt like victory. As I stepped down, my phone buzzed. I checked it quickly. The subject line of the email read, "Notice of intent to sue." The message came from Landon's lawyer, alleging defamation and breach of contract. I stood there in the hallway for a moment, folder still in hand, and felt a bitter sort of humor rise in my chest. They weren't going to walk away quietly. Of course not. I leaned against the wall, letting the coolness of the marble steady me. They wanted to fight this in court and in headlines. I took out my phone and hit record. "This is Madeline Brampton," I said into the lens. I didn't ask for inheritance. I was trusted with it. My voice was clear. And I won't let that trust be buried under threats. I sent it to the Asheville Post's editor with one line, "Let them print it." The rain had thickened into a downpour by the time I left the courthouse. Headlights blurred in the storm. I drove slow, steady, windshield wipers working overtime. The house welcomed me in its usual quiet. I lit the fireplace and watched the flames climb, throwing shadows on Sylvia's portrait above the mantel. I laid out the documents on the old oak desk and looked at the key Landon once called useless. That key had unlocked the room where truth waited. I whispered to no one in particular. They laughed at the house. They didn't know it held the proof. The words didn't need an audience, they just needed to be said. I called Elysia. "We move at dawn," I told her. Then I rang Titus. We were done playing defense. The time for strategy was over. This was execution. I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. I made tea and sat down in the armchair where Sylvia used to read. The storm roared outside, but inside, everything had gone still. Then my laptop pinged. A breaking news alert lit up the screen. Asheville legacy. Local real estate wife claims $50 million mining rights. My name in bold beneath it. I watched the comments appear faster than I could read. Some were supportive, most weren't. "She's making it up. Just another gold digger. Entitled brat wants the family fortune." I didn't react. I just closed the laptop and looked again at the old key. Let them watch. Let them talk. I had no intention of hiding. I woke up just after 5. The air was still, the storm finally gone. Outside the window, the hills of Asheville were washed clean, the sky brushing them with soft pink light. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and walked barefoot down the hallway. No rush. No phone buzzing. Just that quiet stillness you only get after a fight is done. The old house smelled like damp cedar and soil. Earthy. Familiar. I paused at the mantel, fingers trailing along the frame. I reached beneath it, opened a narrow drawer most folks wouldn't even notice. Inside was an envelope, yellowed with time, sealed but never stamped. My name written on the front. Sylvia's handwriting. I sat down, opened it slowly. It read like she'd written it yesterday. "If they mock the old house," she wrote, "it's because they never knew the cornerstones you laid." She talked about legacy, not as money or land, but as standing your ground when it matters. She ended with, "You'll know when it's your time. When you're no longer asking for space. You're taking it." Tears came, but not out of sadness. Not anymore. It was recognition. I wasn't mourning. I was arriving. By mid-morning, I heard tires crunching on gravel. I opened the front door before the knock came. Landon stood there. No suit. No smug grin. Just a weathered man with empty hands and darting eyes. "I came to talk," he said. I didn't invite him in. I walked past him toward the porch steps and gestured for him to sit. He followed. He started with a half apology, or maybe just habit. Things got out of hand. Lawyers, media, the board. I handed him a folder. Deed to the land, final mineral rights filing, Sylvia's letter copy, and Dad's notarized amendment. "This isn't just a legal matter, Landon. You called it rotting wood. But it had roots. You just never stayed long enough to see them." He didn't fight. He didn't push. He tried bargaining. I could help manage the foundation, keep the narrative clean. I didn't flinch. "It's not your story anymore," I said. "And it's not mine to share with you." I stood. "I've already submitted full documentation to the town council. It's not yours to touch." He left without another word. When I turned back toward the house, I didn't feel victory. I felt closure. That afternoon, I drove down to the town hall. The room was filled, Mayor Carter, local journalists, board members, a few neighbors who'd once crossed the street to avoid looking me in the eye. Felix wasn't there. I laid the proposal on the table. It was clean, thought out. Restore Asheville House into a living museum. Hire local contractors. Bring in high school interns. Let kids learn what this town stood on. I added a clause. Partial endowment from the Mineral Trust Fund, to sustain maintenance and create scholarships for trade students. Mayor Carter blinked, then smiled. "You're giving it to the town?" "No," I replied. "I'm placing it where it belonged all along." A few clapped. More joined. When I stepped outside, I saw a reporter snap a photo. Later, it ran in the Tribune. "Widow turns legacy into lifeline." I went back home that evening, sun low behind the hills. The house greeted me like an old friend. I pulled out boxes, baby photos, tax records, Sylvia's scarf, and a tin with my dad's navy pins. I didn't need to keep it all. But some things weren't meant to be forgotten. Elysia and Titus joined me by the fireplace. What now? Elysia asked. I stirred my tea. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams, I quoted softly. Titus raised an eyebrow. Eleanor? I nodded. Then said it plain, we'll rebuild. Right here. Together. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying a house on my back. I felt like I was part of it. Not just in name, in purpose. The sky darkened. Wind rustled the old shutters gently. A knock came at the front door. I opened it. A tall man in a suit, briefcase in hand. You don't know me, he said, but I represent your grandfather's estate. There's one last asset you haven't claimed. I stared at him. Every ending, I thought, is just a door left slightly ajar.